Sara from Posh Pooch Designs, and today's video we're going to be discussing what it means to tie off and weave in your ends. We're also going to talk about how to change colors and how to weave in your ends at the end. Many years ago when I began crocheting, I didn't realize that you weren't supposed to use your hook to weave in your ends. I always used my hook to weave in my ends, and I couldn't figure out why they wouldn't stay in. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how to use a needle. We've got 3 different types here. This is one of my favorites because you can put your yarn right in. This is a plastic needle, works just fine, or a metal needle or a steel needle. These all work great. And so basically what this video is going to be about is how to weave in your ends. So I put together a rectangle and a circle to help us in discussing how to tie off and weave in our ends. And one of the questions that I got a couple of weeks ago is, what does it mean to tie off? Do I make a knot? And of course you do not make a knot. Sometimes it's necessary to make a little slip knot or to make a knot, but really for the most part you should never ever make a knot. It makes bumps, they don't hold well. And so what we're going to do, first with this one, I'm going to show you. Now I've got the 3 needles out here, like I said a few minutes ago. You can use any sort of needle to weave in, but please use a needle to weave in your ends. They will stay better and your projects will be a lot neater. So here we have come to the end of our row. Here's our loop. And what it means to tie off is after you've made that last loop, you just pull that yarn through and snug it down, just like that. That's to tie off. Now, the way to weave in your end, you're going to use a needle, and I'm just going to use this one, and you thread that needle on your hook, or on your needle, I mean. You thread the thread on your needle. Now, I suggest leaving, when you cut off your yarn, leaving about 4, 5, 6 inches so you have something to work with. I know it seems like you're wasting a little bit of yarn, but it will help it because you want a project that's going to look neat, especially if it's a gift. So you're going to put your needle in, and here's our end where we tied off. And what you're going to do is you're going to basically, I always go back like this, and then I make sure that I go through stitches, whether it's a double crochet or single, half double, whatever. I go through stitches, not holes. If you go through the holes between the stitches, when you're tying or when you're weaving in your ends, it's not going to hold. So we're going to go through those stitches, and I usually go through 3 or 4. And if you pull really tight, it will pucker, so you want to loosen up a little. And then I always go to the next stitch and go back the direction that I came. And that just gives it a little bit of a loop. And if it's more of a loose stitch and I'm concerned that the yarn's not going to stay put, I might do that again and turn and go back through, making sure I go through stitches. Now, the last time I go through, I give it just a little bit of a pull like this. And I cut that yarn really close, and then I'll take my project and kind of pull it out. And you can see it's a nice, neat weave in. You don't have ends sticking out or knots or bumps. And the same thing would happen when you're finished with your project and it says, you know, weave in all your ends. You've got another end here where you started. And I always, again, try to start where I've got a little bit of yarn to work with, 4 or 5, maybe 6 inches. Oops, wrong end of the needle there. And I do the exact same thing. I go back in. My needle's a little blunt, so I got to push it in. There we go. Like that. And that just secures down that corner. And then I just, oops. And I do the same thing. I go through 3 or 4 stitches, not the holes. Make sure I'm not pulling too tight. I go to the next stitch there and go back the same direction I came. And this is a nice tight weave, so I'm not going to worry about that one coming out. Give it a little pull, clip. Be careful not to clip your stitches though. and give it a little snug. And now you have both of your ends all nice and tidy. Now let me show you on a circle, and then we're going to talk about how to change colors. Again, when you're tying off your circle, you're going to loop through and just pull your yarn through. Give it a little bit of a snug. I call it snugging it up because you're not tying a knot, you just don't want it to come undone. And you're really going to do just about the same thing on a circle. You're going to go through that stitch that you just made and go through a few more stitches. Pull it through. And then we're going to go to the next stitch and go right back through those same stitches, going in and out. And again, if it's a loose stitching, I might do 3, but for the most part, I just do 2. I give it a little bit of a pull just so it's nice and secure, clip it, and then sort of stretch it a little. And that's how you make the circle. Now, something that happens on a circle sometimes on the back is this hole. And isn't that annoying? It annoys me. So I always try to leave a little bit of a tail. And I always give it just a little bit of a pull. Just not too much. Just a little bit in case it can tighten up. We're going to thread the needle. And what we're going to do is we're going to go right in those stitches. And this is how we can weave in this end and close up this circle, this hole. Because we don't want a hole in our hat or our hot pad or whatever we're making that starts with the circle, maybe the toe of a slipper. Because it happens sometimes if you're using a set number of stitches and not a magic circle. And it can even happen with the magic circle if you don't pull correctly. So, and it's not a hard fix. See, and as we go around, and I always just keep going until I run out of thread, pulling snugly. And then when I get to about maybe this much left of my yarn, I'll go through that next stitch and just go back the way I came. And what that does is it makes it nice and secure. Then I give it a little pull and clip it. And now you have a nice neat under and a nice neat on top. To talk about is how do we change colors and weave in those ends. Now we've already weaved the end in on this one. Actually, we did it over here, didn't we? So I'm not going to have 2 threads to curl over, or to work over, I should say. But I'm going to go ahead and attach this blue one through that first stitch. I'm going to do my loop like we always do, snug that down, and chain 2 more, because that's a chain 3. But we have this extra string, and if you hadn't got your other string already weaved in or woven in to your work, you're going to need to weave those both in. But something that you can do is you can crochet over it like this. And it does hold it in place, but this is not going to hold it forever. So what I usually do, depending on the type of stitch I'm doing on that project, I'll usually do 3 or 4, and we'll go ahead and do 4. And then you'll usually have 2, and I'll give it a little snug, and I'll just go ahead and finish the row that I'm working on. And I'm just going to do a couple more just so you can kind of see. All right, we'll pull that up. And what I've done is I've crocheted over a few of stitches over my tail where we started. And usually, like I said, when you start in, you haven't already got that yarn woven in, so you would have 2 of those. And so at this point, it's okay to crochet over your end, but it's not going to hold like through the laundry or as well as you probably would like it to. And remember, especially if you're giving as a gift, you don't want it to be messy. So what I do is I'll give it a little pull, And then I'll take that yarn and I'll go up through the stitches that I just made, because you want it to be the same color. You don't want to weave it in behind the yellow in case it might show through. And we'll go in those stitches, not in the holes, in the stitches. And just give it a little pull. And that's going to help it stay put. And again, if you might want to leave a longer tail if you're using a wider stitch, so that you can come back again this way to make sure it's very secure. Give it a little pull and clip that off. And that's how we do it when we're changing colors. And it gives you a nice, neat look. If we want to change colors on a circle, which I have done many times, here's our string, here's our loop. We're going to add our yarn. Snug that down, and we've got those strings back there. So this is a double crochet, so I'm going to chain 2 more because the first one counted as our first. And so now we have these 2 strings, and we're going to do the same thing we did on the rectangle. We're going to double crochet over those 2 strands like this. And if our pattern tells us to put 2 double crochets in that stitch, we still do 2 double crochets. We do them right over that yarn. And I'm just going to do 2 more plain double crochets. And now we're just going to, I did 1, didn't I? Let's do another one just to make sure. All right, so we've done our double crochets here over our yarn. Tails that were left, they're back here, and then we move those out of the way, and then we're going to do a couple of double crochets, and I'm just going to do 3 straight ones, and then we'll move our hook. And again, we have tails to weave in, and I'm turning it onto the back because that's where we're going to weave them in. But we have 2 colors, right? So what I do, because I don't want them to show, and you might get a little showing here, and that's why a lot of times, if I'm bringing in a new color, I may, depending on how it looks, I may not stitch over them, because I want it to be nice and neat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just thread the dark pink one on my needle, give it a little snug, and I didn't leave enough yarn, but I'm going to go back through those stitches. My needle down so I can use my scissors. And then I'm going to do the yellow one. And what I'll do with that one, whoops. There we go. What I'm going to do with that one is I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to weave it into the top of the stitches, the row below, so that it blends in. Clip that off. And there you have a nice, neat row on your circle. Now, whichever technique you choose to use, you know, not everything's going to be shaped like a circle or a rectangle. The key thing is to use a needle of your choice. And although you can stitch over it a little bit, it really is best to go back and weave in your ends with a needle, and making sure you get in the stitches, not the holes. And if you want to test to see if what you're doing is working, practice a little bit and then try to frog it, and you'll find if it doesn't frog very easily, you probably did a good job. So that's a little bit of a lesson on what does it mean to tie off and weave in your ends, and changing colors and weaving in your ends.